animation in like nerdy kind of things, like the kind of things that we like to talk about.
Sure.
I think it's very interesting how it's been handled by a variety of different studios.
Well, and I think that's an interesting point too, because every studio handles it just a little bit differently.
Yeah,
whether
for sure.
they incorporate it into their live action stuff, or whether it's a standalone thing, or whether they're even using it to replace live action.
Concurrent stories.
Sure.
We've seen different examples all throughout, at least since I've been watching this kind of material. I mean, going back to Batman, the Animated Series.
Well, I mean, go ahead and bring up the best one first. All right.
I mean, you can definitely make that argument. It's a very outstanding series.
Yeah.
That originally aired, I believe, when I was probably in high school when that came out originally.
Yeah.
And it's to this day, it's a great watch.
It is, and it's because it treats the source material so well.
Yeah.
You get a really definitive portrayal of, I mean, just about every character. Batman, of course. It's Kevin Conroy.
Kevin Conroy and Mark Hamill is the Joker.
Yeah, exactly. But as you go down the line, like, even every villain is fleshed out really, really well.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Mr. Freeze in Batman the Animated Series
it's
is
the best version.
Way better than the garbage that Arnold did.
Oh, my God. Yeah, there's no comparison.
Vine Girl, Bats Lady, Plants Lady. Sorry. Yeah, it was terrible.
That's god-awful. But in that series, I think the characters were treated with a lot of respect.
Oh, for sure.
And it was just handled really well.
Well, that was probably the first cartoon I can remember watching that I felt like watching a comic book.
It was like a Bible of what the artists were supposed to do that they could not stray from. And one of the things was they wanted a very dark series. I mean, that series was drawn on black paper.
Yeah, no,
that's incredible.
Absolutely. And, if you're making a cartoon about the Dark Knight, it needs to be a dark series.
Right.
But it wasn't so dark that kids couldn't watch it. You know, but it is one of those cartoons that not only is it good for kids, but it's got adult, it's the adult mind can watch it and still be entertained.
Sure.
And enjoy the ride.
Well, and they carried that particular animation style and that just that feel into a lot of other things too. Like there's a Justice League version that is like that. They did an animated movie.
They've done
in that
many
style.
Animated movies.
Oh yeah, no. DC's done a ton.
Right, but like the Dark Knight Returns series, there's part 1 and 2.
The
That's
Mask
also
of the
Batman,
Phantasm.
Mask of the Phantasm, The Killing Joke.
I'd love to see Mask of the Phantasm brought into live action. I think that could be done really, really well. If it's done right, I think it could be done really cool.
Right, and that's one of the things I think the animation always gives you the flexibility over live action. Is you can do all kinds of things in animation that in live action the CGI bill would be incredible. In the past, you didn't even have the technology.
Sure.
Now they have the technology, but just to do it, the rendering would be ridiculous. Like, although you get to the point now where, like something like Unreal Engine, Unreal 5, can almost make animation look like real life.
Yeah, it can help with that for sure. But I'm glad you brought that up as an example, because a great example of that animation not being able to really translate into live action is you got to look at the Spider-Verse movies.
Yeah.
Because those are movies that I don't want to say you couldn't make them, but they wouldn't be as good if they were live action.
Oh, no, I agree 100%, but they played off of the Spider-Verse movies. They really played off the idea that this is a cartoon that's like a comic book.
Yeah.
To the nth degree, and have mastered it. I mean, I'm just going to say that they've mastered it.
Oh, 100%.
And those movies are phenomenal. And for that very reason, that you're exactly right, as a live action, it's a very real possibility when he comes to live action, because he's going to come to live action Miles Morales.
Oh, Miles Morales.
That you may be disappointed by the live action version of Miles Morales versus the animated version of Miles Morales.
It's entirely possible, because they've just knocked it out of the park in that way. And I mean, we've gushed about those movies.
Oh yeah,
over and over again. But the point I was trying to make there is that that's not a movie you can do in live action and have the same success. And I think that's the way Sony has been really good about that.
Yeah.
using their animation as opposed to their live action.
Well, Sony's also kind of had to. Sony's fairly innovative because of how badly the Marvel live action movies had been crushing their live action movies.
They had to.
So you had to kind of go this way and do this animation, pivot to that pivot, and that was the right thing to do. And it's interesting because you say that, but then you also you said something when we talked about the live action versus the animation. It made me triggered in my head the thought of, with a different company, with Disney, live action Star Wars has been augmented by the cartoon, by the portrayal of Anakin Skywalker, and we've said that before.
For sure.
Matt Lanter really breathed new life into the character of Anakin Skywalker.
See, I was going to say augmented is not a strong enough term. It really, really added to the Star Wars universe, so much so that now it's come full circle.
Yeah.
The animation helped to bridge the gap in the live action stuff, but now the animation has spawned its own live action.
Well, yeah, if you're talking about Ahsoka, which is basically Rebels season 5.
Exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Yes. So that's a really cool thing. But again, that's one of those things where, because of the creators of those shows caring so much about the content, treating it with respect, and making a product that should have, frankly, been what we saw in live action, but maybe was limited by the technology of the time or just the writing of George Lucas.
Dave Filoni didn't work for Lucasfilm at the time when those 3 live action movies came out. So
no, or we would have had better live action movies. He is
very much a responsible party for the success of those cartoons. When he got hired, when they put out the casting call, and he had been directing, I don't know the other cartoons off the top of my head that he had directed and written, drawn, and stuff like that.
Sure.
Previous to Lucasfilm. But when he, interviewed for that job and then got it, the first thing he did with George was draw Ahsoka.
Yeah.
And then the rest is history, as they say.
That's worked out pretty well.
That's worked out really well. Now, interesting, Filoni didn't expect Ahsoka to be Anakin's Padawan. He was drawing her for
Plo Koon?
Plo Koon, yes.
Okay, yeah.
That he really liked, and George's like, no, that's Anakin's Padawan. And he's like, Anakin doesn't have a Padawan. No, Anakin has a Padawan.
He does now. And Filoni probably, his head exploded under that cowboy hat.
Yeah. Right. Because you're working with the master. Someone growing up as a Star Wars fan, you're working with the creator.
Well, and could you imagine a character you create and George Lucas goes, yeah, that's going to be Anakin's Padawan.
What?
Dude.
Yeah, it'd be huge.
It'd be
huge. And then, went on to, as we've said before, be the most important character in Star Wars.
Yeah.
She's the glue that seals the whole universe together and wouldn't exist without the animation.
Yeah.
Right? And wouldn't have been brought to life without, again, I go back to Matt Lanter. Matt Lanter's portrayal of Anakin Skywalker made me personally like the character.
Right. Because prior to that, he's just a whiny little bitch and nobody really cared. But Hayden Christensen, I don't believe played him poorly. I just think Matt Lanter
written that way. I think largely
100%.
At the time, I probably complained about him a lot more. In retrospect, as I've gotten older and have written more, it's like he's probably just written that way.
Right. Like, how else do you say those lines?
They're whiny lines.
They're whiny lines. So he has to play the character that way. But Matt Lanter's portrayal came from Filoni's vision and envisioned him as literally a different character.
Yeah.
Or a different side of that character.
Well, and the thing that I love about the Clone Wars cartoon is it filled all those gaps that you're talking about in that first trilogy, the prequel trilogy, or the second trilogy. But it filled all of those gaps so that Dave got to go in and direct Lanter in the show, to where you go and you watch that after and you kind of really start to understand why Anakin acted the way he did on the screen through Lanter's portrayal of him and the voice acting, and you really understand it more and better, and you really feel for him more than you would have before.
Exactly right. So in the case of Star Wars, it's used as a bridge to tie everything together. Yeah. In the case of Sony Spider-Man, it's used as the main thing. In the case of DC, it's their best stuff.
It has been, and Marvel's had some good stuff too. X-Men 1997 or X-Men 97.
I was just gonna say, in Marvel they use it a little differently. It's alongside and kind of interweaves, and
but it's been its own thing.
It's been its own thing. X-Men 97, or as it was called when I was a kid, just X-Men.
Right, sure.
That cartoon was awesome.
Oh, it was great.
I mean, I remember just like I had to be to the living room at a certain time on Saturday morning so I could see X-Men.
Well, because that cartoon was based on the very best incarnation of the X-Men that haven't really been on the screen. They've taken some elements, but it's based on the Uncanny X-Men in the comic book.
That's exactly it.
And the Uncanny X-Men was phenomenal. I used to read that book, and I don't know if it's still called the Uncanny X-Men now, but at that time it was, and it was Chris Claremont was writing it, Jim Lee was drawing it, and it was just awesome. Just some of the best storylines.
Oh, sure.
Some of the best storylines. The whole Mr. Sinister storyline with Apocalypse and Madeline Pryor, and that whole storyline is incredible. For a time when Xavier was out in the galaxy doing stuff, Magneto was leading the X-Men.
Sure.
Because Magneto's he gets cast as a villain, but he's not really a villain.
He's not. That's just it. He's not really a villain. Just him and Xavier don't exactly have the same vision.
Sometimes Magneto's a villain, but he's not really a villain. He's more anti-hero.
Yeah,
but he can be extreme anti-hero, I guess, is the way I would put it.
I think that's a good way to put it as well. I mean, I think we can go on and on about the X-Men cartoon.
Oh, for sure.
For sure.
We can go on and on about any of these cartoons.
And we should at some point. I absolutely agree. I think the one thing that we haven't really touched on is so used as a stopgap or a bridge, used as the main headliner, used as a supplement. Certainly animation's been all of those things, but one of the things that interests me with animation is something that we've seen out of the other side of the pond, and that's Doctor Who. What Doctor Who is using animation for is to fill in the gaps of episodes that are lost. So in other words, they have a few different series, as they call them over there at seasons, where they're missing a good portion of the footage, but still have the audio. So what they're doing is they're filling in the portions where they don't have video with animation to actually complete a series.
Well, that's because they lost historical archive footage.
Shame on you, BBC.
Of Doctor Who, of the old school original. I mean, Doctor Who's been on for, 50 years.
60. As a matter of fact, this year celebrating the 60th.
Yeah, we talked about that.
Right.
Doctor Who's been on for 60 years, and so, but over time, was it many years ago there was some fire in their archive? And
and it destroyed a good portion of the episodes, or rather, it destroyed their versions of them, and they haven't been able to recover, from any other copies that may have been out there. So as a result, they're fixing it, or they're doing their best to fix it. One in particular was a Fourth Doctor story called Shada. Shada. Search it. It's great. And Shada. I watched it, and it's a little jarring going back and forth between live action and animation. Sure. But it finishes the story in a way that I wouldn't have been able to see without it. And I think it's a good tool.
This made me think of Who Framed Roger Rabbit, but
Oh man, that's a whole other can of worms there. I mean,
or the Take on Me video.
Sure, yeah. Getting into the 80s, throwing animation onto cells, Chuck singing, everybody.
It happens from time to time, from a certain point of view.
But either way, I think animation's being used in a lot of really clever ways. I don't think it's going anywhere as a medium.
No, it shouldn't, because
terms
it's an art form in and of itself.
Yeah, certainly. And I mean, in terms of intertwining with live action or being used in all the ways that we just talked about with live action.
Well, and I think it'll continue to, as you're saying, it'll continue on because of the success. Just look at the success Star Wars has had with it, and that's enough for anybody.
That's all you need to point to.
Yeah. Thanks for watching the Nerd Card. If you like this content, please remember to like and subscribe and hit notifications so that you get notified of every new video that we have.
And do not forget, you can check us out on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all that good stuff, and especially thenerdcard.com. And with that, we will say, what's on your nerd card?